I started the Real Mental podcast because it bugs me when film and TV miss the mark about how mental health gets portrayed. Real Mental is a podcast where a film-loving psychiatrist, that's me, talks to a film critic to help people figure out their lives by getting to the truth about mental health in the movies. Welcome, Corey Sherman, to the Real Mental podcast.
Thanks for having me, Marsha. I appreciate it.
It's really great to have you. I loved your film, Big Boys. It was really a wonderful, very touching, very funny movie, and I was very excited to get the opportunity to talk to you today.
Thank you for saying that. Thanks for making the time to watch it.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I love coming of age stories. You know, I'm a psychiatrist, and when I see stories about teenagers who are figuring out their identity, it's always compelling, but they're not always done in a sensitive or realistic way. And I found your film was both sensitive and realistic. So I was wondering, first of all, what made you decide to tell this story at this time?
Yeah, I felt like I hadn't seen the kind of honest portrayal of what it looks like to wrestle with your sexuality at that like adolescent, sort of like middle school, early high school age, represented on screen in a way that just rang true for me. I felt like I was often seeing versions that were sort of romanticized or glossy or sort of smoothed over a lot of like the hard edges and the awkwardness of that time. And so I was just really inspired by the idea of like making the most realistic version of that, sort of like warts and all as possible, so that anybody who could identify with it or went through something similar would just feel more seen, and like this period of their life was sort of being unearthed and like represented to them, hopefully in a context that was compassionate and warm and funny, so that what, for at least for myself, and I think for many people as well, particularly queer people, is like a really difficult time in life that we often don't really want to revisit. It's like this movie makes those memories sort of more accessible again.
For sure. And because you made it so specific and so real, I think it was very universal. And I think anyone could identify with, you know, this coming of age and this wrestling with any type of identity. You know, who am I at 14? And when there's so many pressures, like the brother who was a bully, you know, trying to push him to be a certain way and shame him about who he was, you know, I think it's something that we can all relate to.
Yeah, totally. It's been really nice to see that the movie has like a pretty universal appeal, that people, straight and gay of all ages, like see themselves in it. Like that's the most I could have asked for, is just that people feel like their experiences are being accurately represented on screen and in a way that feels like refreshing and touches some, some like younger part of themselves. And it's been nice also just to see that, I think there's this idea that like because a movie is about a gay character, it's sort of like it's automatically like nicheified and that it's only going to be for gay audiences. And I think that I've been inspired time and again by gay movies that just prove that what we go through as queer people like can touch a universal audience. It's not just for us.
Well, again, like I said before, because you made it so specific, it really became universal. And the character Jamie, played so brilliantly by Isaac Krasner. Wow, what a performance. His character was so excruciatingly awkward, but at the same time, so brave.
Mm.
And I love that juxtaposition. How did you get that idea to make him like both of those things at the same time?
I mean, thanks for saying that. I don't even really remember conceiving of the character that way. Like, I think that I wanted him to be really, his effort is very apparent at all times. And he really wants to be taken seriously. He wants to be seen as more adult than he is. He wants to be liked by the people that he really likes. And I just like the idea that he's very open with his affection and wanting affection in return. And I think that that totally makes, in some ways, for a brave character, because it's vulnerable to put yourself out there and to show somebody that you want them to like you back, and to really like put this very sort of naked effort into impressing somebody and coming off well. And I just think Isaac had such a deep understanding of how to convey that effort and that sense of just like trying really hard and throwing all these things at the wall to be seen by this guy that he has feelings for. And I think that he makes that effort really funny and really touching and very realistic. And I mean, I think it's really what makes the movie work is the fact that I think that we can all identify with that desire to get the attention of somebody who we really, really like and all of the sort of strain and effort that goes into that. And I think that Isaac just makes that incredibly like fun to watch and very identifiable.
Yeah, and the brother, Taj Cross, playing the character Will, was very, very interesting because he came across as quite a jerk for most of the film, and then there's this one scene where he reveals just this tiny little flicker of vulnerability after Jamie gets hurt, and it's like it's almost impossible for him to let down his guard and show that he cares, and you really see that, and suddenly I got such a different sense of him as how hard he's trying to have a certain kind of identity and to be so super cool and so laid back and so attractive. And,
Right.
you know, he can never, ever show his own weaknesses or his fears or his, you know, worries. And that's also, you know, a struggle that he's having, you know, and a different type of struggle. But I had so much empathy for him in that moment. And I thought that scene was so great that you put that in there to give us a different idea of who he was.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that that is, yeah, totally like you're saying. It's like that's a prison in and of itself. It's just like the performance of sort of being invincible and always on top. And I think Taj just did such a wonderful job of humanizing that person. And again, just like Isaac did, like you can feel the effort that he's putting in to put on that performance of like the cool guy. And you can see the cracks in the performance. And because he's only 16 years old, he can only pull it off so well. He's only so much of like a tough guy, and I think he does such a good job at making that really funny when you can feel how important it is to him that he comes off this way.
Yeah, and how deeply, deeply invested he is in his brother being like him, right?
Hmm.
And how anxiety provoking it seems for him to contemplate the possibility that Jamie is not like him. And even when he's kind of poking him and saying, "You're not gay, are you?" It's like he kind of knows. And
Right.
he's demanding that Jamie deny it because he's afraid of what it would mean to Jamie and to him if Jamie were. And I thought that was very interesting as well.
Oh, I'm so glad. Yeah, that's definitely something I remember talking with Taj about is sort of like the intention behind that part in particular. It's like, why is it so important to him that Jamie not be gay? Like, why is he pushing so hard for Jamie to, yeah, like follow in his own footsteps? And yeah, I think that, Jamie's sort of in uncharted territory. And like you're saying, it scares Will to think that Jamie would be taking what Will deems to be a more vulnerable or like weaker path. And I think it just takes the movie for Jamie to sort of assert himself and prove to Will that that's not the case at all, that it's just who he is.
And the funny thing is that the more vulnerable Jamie is willing to be, he actually comes out as the stronger character because the person who allows themselves to be seen is the more courageous one, and the one who's so guarded and has the walls up and the persona on is the one who is more cowardly.
Totally. Yeah. No, I agree.
So, how important, I mean, it sounds very important to you, but how important is it to you to have a film that's psychologically accurate? I mean, I'm a psychiatrist, so I'm looking for that in films. I'm looking for films that show people as they really are, not, you know, the Hollywood version. How is that important to you and why?
It's so important. Yeah, I mean, I have no training in the field, but like I definitely think about it a lot just in terms of like wanting to show the way that people really express themselves in the world. I think that one thing about particularly American movies is they often have people articulate perfectly what they're feeling and what they're going through and how they feel about other people. And I just find that that's not like 99% of the time not what life feels like and not the way that we're able to express ourselves or we're too afraid to express ourselves. And so things end up coming out in sort of convoluted ways, in more subtextual ways. It's like you really have to like read between the lines, I think, and everyone is doing that all the time. They're like listening to what the person they're talking to is saying, but they're also assuming all sorts of things and making guesses about what the person really means or really thinks of them. And so I like making a movie where it's like people are saying one thing on the surface, but it's up to the audience to really interpret, like, oh, what did they really mean when they said that? Or like, what were they really wanting to get out of that interaction? And I just find that so much more engaging to watch. I love it so much watching in other movies because it just feels so much more true to life. And it's actually, I think, putting the audience in a more active position when they get to decipher like that, as opposed to being like spoon fed the exact subtext of what's going on.
Right, not too on the nose.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I love that too because I was thinking exactly that, that we're not being spoon-fed, we actually have to think. And so you're honoring your audience, you're honoring our intelligence and our emotional intelligence and saying, "I trust you guys. I trust that you can figure out what's going on here, or at least as much as you can, and that's enough." And I appreciate that because, there's too much passive sort of just taking in things, and it's nice to be able to meet the film halfway and engage with it. Like, we're having an interaction too.
Right, right.
How much of this film, if I can ask you, was autobiographical, would you say?
I mean, a lot. Like a lot of just like the character's psychology and some of his anxieties, the kind of guys he likes. Like a lot of that was borrowed from my own life. Like that was sort of like a foundation. And I think that so much of, like I was saying at the beginning of our conversation, like the impetus for making this movie was like I felt all these things and I had these experiences that I felt like I didn't have a lot of closure on or weren't like reflected back at me in media. And so they felt even lonelier to me to experience because I was like, I'm just not seeing this anywhere. And so it was really exciting to me to like put it all out in the open and the hope that people who could identify with it would sort of have that cathartic moment of sort of being like, oh, like it wasn't just me. Like there's a whole world of people who experience things like this, or at least this filmmaker also experienced things like this. But then it was such an important part of making the movie was being open to the people in my life and my collaborators and my cast to like add so much depth and life and specificity to the characters that couldn't have been there if I was just drawing from my own experiences. So there are all these details about Jamie and what happens on the trip and stuff that is borrowed from conversations I had with people and ideas from my collaborators and all these things that I'm so glad are in the movie because I think that it helped me break out of thinking about it as like, oh, how can I most accurately represent my own childhood as opposed to like, how can I do justice to a universal experience?
And now, let's pause for a quick word about my other podcast. I'm Dr. Marcia Sirota. We all need to be inspired and uplifted these days. We need a good laugh and we need to be moved. In the Ruthless Compassion podcast, I speak with a wonderfully diverse group of people. They've overcome daunting obstacles and they're making unique, exciting contributions to our communities and to our world. The Ruthless Compassion podcast has created more than 175 episodes over the past several years. Why not have a listen to it today? Absolutely. Well, it strikes me as we're talking that this movie is kind of a love story, right? Between Jamie and Dan.
Mm,
And obviously not your typical love story, but Dan was so loving and so accepting and so embracing of Jamie as a human being. And even when Jamie revealed his crush, he was just like, okay, you know, I mean, obviously nothing's going to happen here, kiddo, but, that's cool. But it was like so, we should all be rejected that way, right?
right.
With such respect and tenderness. It really felt like a love story, like it was Jamie's first love story, his first love affair, but obviously of the heart only. But Dan reciprocated in such a beautiful way without violating any boundaries or making Jamie feel small. It was really touching.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, I mean, that was definitely a huge part of the reason I wanted to make this movie is because I had a lot of crushes like that growing up that couldn't go anywhere for one reason or another. But when I did get to tell some of these guys how I felt, they responded really like graciously and in some cases quite lovingly. And like it was so nice to have that sort of like closure and a moment of like harmony at the end of what had felt like such a sort of like asymmetrical, like lonely experience. And I wanted to show that that was possible. And also, I think David Johnson III, who plays Dan, just did such a wonderful job, like infusing that character with such a believable kind of warmth and like kindness, but he's also has that sort of dudely kind of like coolness, like capability that you could totally imagine Jamie just like, he wants to be with him and he wants to like be him at the same time. And I think David knew just how to like ride that line really realistically. And you could totally understand. He made it very easy to understand why Jamie would be obsessed with somebody like him. Yeah. And I think that, like I said, if somebody watches this movie and like if they have any of the sort of like moments in Jamie's life where you're saying it's like a love story, but it's not a traditional one where it's like they get together in the end. Like sometimes those experiences can feel really confusing because it's like, well, I didn't have my Hollywood ending. Like it must have been a failure, or like I don't know what box to put this in. I think that hopefully this movie provides sort of like a new box to put it in. It's like, even though this didn't work out or it couldn't have worked out, that doesn't mean that it wasn't an important experience in your life. Like it still was a story worth telling.
Right. And it shows that you can have this crush on someone and that they can hold your crush in their heart with respect
Yeah. Yeah.
and affection and not shame you for it. And,
Totally.
even though, like you say, he was this doodly straight guy, he didn't make Jamie feel bad about having a crush on him like some straight guys do. It's like, how dare you, as a gay person, have a crush on me, a straight person? That's an affront to my
Totally.
straight sensibilities. He was like a much more cool guy who was confident and secure in himself, and he didn't need to prove anything, or he wasn't afraid. Like, he also had courage. He was comfortable within himself, and he was
Yeah.
able to accept Jamie's feelings without feeling threatened and without having to make Jamie feel bad. And it was wonderful to show that that's something that's possible for a straight guy to do, and for just anyone to do to someone who is saying, I have feelings for you. It's a way to receive the feelings with compassion and not shame the other person for their experience. I really love that about the film.
Thank you. Yeah, that is, I mean, I think a huge, just speaking from my own experience, like there's so much fear and shame being a gay man around how you're going to be perceived by straight men, particularly when you're young, because you're just, you have no choice. You're surrounded by straight men at school and your family. And so I wanted to make something that showed a sort of like mutual respect and harmony is very possible. And as a way of, I think, just showing another side of that kind of relationship, because like you're saying, it's like often also represented in media in a way that's like very like tense and dangerous. And, it doesn't always have to be that way.
Speaking of tense and dangerous, I also really appreciated that you didn't make him the tragic gay figure.
Yeah.
I'm so over those kinds of stories, and
Mhm.
that it was a happy ending, even though it wasn't, riding off into the sunset together. I mean, he's a 14-year-old boy. It
Yeah.
was a happy ending because he got to accept himself and he got to be treated with respect. And I thought, how much better can you get, from that experience? And he got to really know himself. So to me, it was far from the tragic gay figure.
Oh, good. Yeah. Yeah. I definitely wanted it to end with a feeling of optimism and like he's taken the first big hard step towards like in the direction of a life that I believe is going to be a happy one because he has so much love to give and like he's already off to such a good start just in terms of like you were saying like his bravery and his self-respect and that there's still a ways to go. There's to me that's sort of like the bittersweetness is like there's still going to be time before he can really get what he wants. But he knows what he wants and he's okay with what he wants now. And that's like a very important big step.
I love the scenes where he was projecting himself into the future and he kept seeing Dan and then trying to put the girl in the picture. It's like
Yeah,
shaking
yeah,
his head and writing all these reasons why he's not gay down on a piece of paper. Like he's
yeah.
trying to like rewrite the script for himself. It was very, very sweet. It was like, oh, it's so teenager. It's like teenage is hell, right?
Yes, totally. Yeah. And again, that goes to just, when you're that age, how much being straight seems like the preferable option. And it's like, I'll do anything. Like, please, like, make me straight again. And yeah, I mean, that stuff is totally funny, but it's also, yeah, it's like heartbreaking to me remembering the just like self denial and how little I thought of gayness. It takes a while to unlearn that.
Well, yeah, our society is constantly having to relearn just to love one another and ourselves, right? It seems
Yeah.
like such a simple thing to love ourselves and to love each other, and seems to be like always eluding us. So it's wonderful to see a film where those themes are portrayed and portrayed so sweetly and humorously and powerfully.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Well, I'm gonna ask you one last question, which is when I watch a movie, I always walk away from it and I sit with it, and if it stays with me, I go, okay, something's happening here. So I'm wondering when your audience walks away from this film, what do you want to leave them with? What thoughts, what feelings?
Yeah. I mean, one big thing is I want them to have had fun. Like, I want them to have laughed and felt like a rush of like, wow, that movie was a good time. Because it's really important to me that I make stuff that is fun and rewatchable and just like it's easy, It's hopefully like emotionally rich, but it's also goes down easy. And then I also just want them to feel more compassion towards their younger selves or themselves as they are now, because I think a lot of the movie is just about shame and dealing with shame very privately and not talking to anybody about it and the damage that that can do to a person. And there's something I find that's very cathartic about being in a theater with other people. And like I was saying before, just like seeing like, oh, I wasn't the only one who had that experience, like I now see that that's a totally okay thing and it's a totally legitimate thing and a common thing. And I think that that can be very healing for people. And so, if anything in the movie touches on a private experience that somebody had, particularly when they were younger, that they now can feel better about and honestly more self respect for, that would make me very happy.
Wow, that's like film as healing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it has been for me.
Well, it's really been wonderful talking with you. I enjoyed the film so much. I'm not surprised that I've had such a good time talking with you. I mean, you really made a beautiful movie, and I really hope for great success for this film and for your future.
Thank you, Marcia. I really appreciate it.
Thank you again, Corey Sherman, for coming on the Real Mental podcast.
This is Dr. Marcia Sirota. Thanks for listening to the Real Mental podcast. Please leave a review and your comments wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to sign up for my free newsletter at marciasirotamd.com. While you're at it, why not check out my Ruthless Compassion podcast with over 140 episodes and counting? And if you have any ideas for guests for either Real Mental or Ruthless Compassion podcasts, please email us at info@marciasirotamd.com. Happy listening!